Okay, we're officially recording. I guess I'll call this meeting to order at 7:06. And I will call the roll. Camille Casaretti.
I am present.
Antonia Ferraro. Yes, I'm here. Tia is absent. She sent in an email. Does anybody see, is Vincent here? Did anyone see Vincent come in the room? Okay. Nana Poku Ajakum.
Present.
All right. Alfred D. Ingenis.
Present.
Joseph Alexander.
Present.
Yvonne Bonda.
Present.
Nancy Randall. Is Nancy here? Oh, there's Vincent. Vincent just entered the room. Okay.
Nancy's having trouble unmuting.
Nancy's having trouble unmuting.
Nancy's here.
I see her. Okay. Vincent, you're here, correct?
Oh, it says connecting to audio.
Okay, I'll come back to him. Vanessa Gonzalez Uoka.
Present.
And Nakia Muhasa Brown.
Present.
And is Vincent Liu here now?
Oh, he's on.
Vincent, are you present?
Present.
Okay, great. And Nancy, are you present now?
She wrote in the chat that she can't unmute. Nancy, if you want to sign off and try to sign on again, you try that.
Well, I guess I'll just leave that open-ended as to whether she's in attendance or not. Okay, so
we see her. We can see her.
You see her? Okay, so I can mark her present. All right. We do have quorum. So Nancy, doesn't sound like Nancy is able to read anything at this point, correct? Nancy, you're still not fully functioning. All right, so then Camille, do you want to read the introduction or no? Camille, are you frozen?
I appear to be frozen. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. Should I read the introduction or would you like to do it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have like a thing splashing over here saying
okay. All right, I'll read it. Okay, thank you all for coming to the District 15 Community Education Council meeting tonight. We appreciate your time and we are glad that you could join us. For those of you who are new to CEC meetings, there are 32 CECs throughout the city plus 4 citywide councils. Each CEC represents a community school district and each is made up of 11 volunteer members, 9 of whom are elected by parents in the district. The remaining members are appointed by the Brooklyn Borough President, and we have 1 high school student member, although we, CC 15, do not have a high school student member. CC 15 is a state mandated public body responsible for ensuring that public school parents and the public have input in educational decisions that are made at the school district level. Our council reviews education policies and advocates for high quality education that benefit all of our District 15 public elementary and middle school students. CEC 15 serves 35 elementary and middle schools and 1 high school under the oversight of our superintendent. CEC members serve in an advisory role on education matters to the district superintendent, the chancellor of the Department of Education, and to state and city elected officials. We approve district school zoning lines submitted by the Department of Education. We evaluate our district superintendent, and we review the district's educational programs. We also support school leadership teams. We submit recommendations for the School Construction Authority's annual capital plan. And as of recent amendments to the law, CECs advise in the selection of parent coordinators. We actively seek input and feedback from the public and encourage you to visit our website, cecd15.org. Take a look at our Facebook page, connect with us on Twitter, and write to us about any issues you may want to address or learn about. Each school has a CEC liaison. All of our names and contact info are available on our website, and I encourage you to please sign the attendance sheet that I am going to drop into the chat right now. And I will hand the floor to our parliamentarian, Joe Alexander, to read the public comment protocol.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. The mayor's extended her local, the mayor has extended his local state of emergency address to the COVID-19 pandemic, used to say HOCL. In accordance, tonight's meeting is taking place remotely and will include a public comment period. We will take remote comments to gather additional feedback from our families and school community members. You may leave your camera on, or for your own privacy, if you prefer, you may use audio only during the comment period or throughout the meeting. For rules of engagement, when you comment, please respect the privacy of others. Don't include names of children or staff. Guests who make inappropriate comments will be removed from the meeting. During our public comment period, those attending virtually may raise your hand to comment or indicate in the chat that they would like to speak. Those called upon will be unmuted. Speakers will be called on one at a time, be allowed 1 minute each for their comment. We will hear as many speakers as the time allows. It is possible that not every comment or question will be given time. So the best way to get your question answered is to always write us at the email address I'm going to paste into the chat. CEC members will also be given a comment period. Members will be called on. Each are permitted 1 2-minute comment question. If members do not have a comment, they may cede their time to the chair. And thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So welcome everyone. This is our CEC 15 special session on March 21st, 2023. And we are going to be reviewing and voting on 2 resolutions. I just want to extend my gratitude to a number of people. One, to CCSE, our citywide Council on Special Education, for drafting one of the resolutions, which we have revised a little bit. I don't think they'll mind too much. And thank you to Antonia for working so diligently on that. And we have Lainey Hamison here with us tonight, and Azine Zad, who are going to be talking about resolutions. Azine is on the PEP. He's our Brooklyn representative from the Brooklyn Borough President. And I also want to acknowledge Lupe Hernandez, who is here on the call from the Public Advocate's Office. Hi, Lupe, welcome. And I also want to acknowledge that we don't have an interpretation team tonight, and I'm very sorry for that. We have this ongoing problem with the DOE that if we don't give them an excessive amount of notice for meetings, we're just not going to have interpretation. And hopefully that will change in the coming year when they are transferring to different vendors, and praying that we will have more access to interpretation in the future. So Antonia, I will hand the floor back over to you, and if you need me to read one of those resolutions, I'm happy to do that. You're muted.
Do we want to ask Lainey to just give us a brief overview before we go into reading her resolution?
Sure, however you want it.
Okay, I'll share the screen as well so that people can see it. And Lainey, you have the floor to discuss your resolution.
So as you all are probably very aware, there were big budget cuts to schools this year that caused the loss of a lot of valuable program services and increased class size. The DOE has been saying for some time that there would be no further school cuts to the budget next year, but at the hearings last week, they admitted that there would be school budget cuts, though they won't say by how much. Overall, the DOE is going to be, the agency as a whole is going to be cut, they say, by $800 million. An unknown amount is going to be cut at the school level. We believe that the city council, most of whom expressed great regret after voting for the budget last year and asking the mayor for a chance for a revote, which he denied, should, instead of allowing these budget cuts to go forward, should restore the budget cuts from that happened this year. We have quite a bit more money coming to our schools. We have, I think, $565 million in additional foundation funds from the state, as well as city budget surplus. If you go down, if you scroll a little bit down on this, it'll have all the numbers. So yeah, scroll down a little bit more. $568 million in additional state foundation aid, which is the last phase-in amount of $1.3 billion extra that has come to our schools over these 3 years. Meanwhile, we've lost over 4,000 full-time K-12 teachers since fiscal year 2019. We have a surplus. We're going to have a surplus this year citywide of about $5 billion. And we have a cash balance of $14.6 billion. And we are supposed to be lowering class size starting next fall in all schools to cap class sizes at much lower levels over the next 5 years. So we're going to need to start adding teachers rather than subtracting them. We also, one of the things that's very disturbing is that there's been a proposal to cut billions of dollars of new capacity out of the capital plan. They are proposing to build only about 35,000 seats, which is a cut of over 21,000 seats compared to the plan that was adopted in June 2021. A cut of $2.3 billion, cutting 11,000 seats and moving another 11,000 seats into the category of funded for design only, which means not funded to be built, but only funded to be designed. And meanwhile, the deputy chancellor said at the hearings last week that it will cost $30 billion to $35 billion to create enough space to lower class size. Well, first of all, we don't find that number convincing for many reasons, which I will go into if you want me to. But beyond that, there's a clear contradiction between his claim that we need $30 to $35 billion to build enough seats and only wants to spend, I guess we don't have the numbers in here, but the numbers they want to spend, I can look it up, is far less than that, obviously, and they've cut $2.3 billion. I'll look up what the actual numbers they want to spend on this. In any case, it's a real problem when you want to cut school budgets for staffing, you want to cut the capital plan, and you have a law that you have to comply with to lower class sizes. So that's my, the resolution that I drafted basically urges the DOE also to provide more specific numbers to the PEP. The budget that they provided the PEP lacks a lot of the budget allocations appropriations that the city council gets, and that we believe is contrary to the law. But also to resolve that the DOE should clarify what budgets, how much they want to cut the budgets to schools, that they should clarify where the additional $90 million in fair student funding planned for schools with high numbers of homeless and disadvantaged students is going to come from out of their budget, which they have not done because they don't plan to increase the budget at all by $90 million. There's a bunch of stuff in here about transparency that we want from now on there to be 2 new units of appropriation every year in the budget that reflects the levels of school funding, so we're not fooled in the futures about this, and that we should urge the panel for educational policy and the city council to insist on an education budget that not only doesn't cut this budget to schools anymore, but that fully restores the cuts made to schools this year, which the city council said they regretted, and to reject any capital plan that doesn't have sufficient space to meet the law's class size benchmarks, especially in the out years. We actually believe that if the city does nothing, they're going to meet the benchmarks next year. Year 2 will depend very much on what happens to enrollment and school budgets. But for years 3 to 5, it's going to be impossible to meet them unless they build a lot more space. And since it takes 5 years on average to build inside a new school, at least, they really need to be starting now. Actually, they should have started last year, but there's no time to waste. And you can't really argue that you should cut the budget by billions of dollars and thousands of seats now. And yet you need, billions of dollars more to meet the goals in the plan. So we believe that there needs to be a more expansive capital plan as well as a fully funded schools for that purpose. So I'm going to look up exactly how much they want to fund school capital plan for next year in their February amendment, if I can get out of this screen.
Okay.
And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Should we just read the resolution and then go to comments, Camille, and questions, or we shouldn't do double questions, right? Okay. Would one of the members like to read this resolution, please?
I can read it.
Great.
Okay. Draft resolution to urge the PEP and the City Council to restore school budget cuts made last year and expand the capital plan to be able to meet the benchmarks in the new class size law. Whereas this year, most school budgets were slashed by large amounts, with the city comptroller estimating that 77% of schools had their fair student funding allocation reduced by a total of $469 million, whereas as of January 13th, 2023, 86% of schools experienced even larger cuts to their entire Galaxy budgets, totaling $893 million compared to last year, averaging about $655,000 each. Whereas many city council members said they were caught unaware with the severity of the budget cuts after voting to approve the budget in June. Whereas after they learned of the extent of these cuts, many council members said they regretted having voted for the budget and asked the mayor that they be allowed to take a revote, though, I'm sorry, can you just stop scrolling a little bit? It's getting a little confusing. Though the mayor refused to allow this to occur, whereas these budget cuts led to class size increases this year in most schools, as well as the loss of many critical programs, whereas the mayor's preliminary budget for next year would cut another $800 million from the DOE budget, in addition to a $176 million mid-year cut, whereas the chancellor and other DOE officials admitted during the council budget hearings on March 15, 2023, that they are planning additional cuts to school budgets, although they refused to say how much they would be. whereas the DOE did not explain what cuts would be made elsewhere in the DOE budget to come up with the additional $90 million in fair student funding planned for schools with a large number of homeless and disadvantaged students. Whereas New York City public schools have already lost more than 4,000 full-time K-12 teachers since fiscal year 2019, according to DOE headcount data posted on the New York City Council website. Whereas DOE is slated to receive an additional $568 million in state foundation aid for next year, the final payment in three-year phase-in of about $1.3 billion resulting from the CFE lawsuit intended to provide New York City students with their right to a sound basic education, including smaller classes. Whereas the Independent Budget Office, estimates that the city will end fiscal year 2023 with a $4.9 billion surplus. And as of early February, the city's cash balance was at $14.6 billion, including reserves. Whereas starting next fall, the DOE is supposed to start lowering class size according to a new state law, with far smaller class size caps to be required of all schools over the next 5 years. Whereas this phase-in process will require significantly more funding for space and staffing if all schools are going to be able to reach these smaller caps, especially in the out years. Whereas according to the latest available data from the Blue Book for the 2021-22 school year, about 347,000, which is 38% of students citywide, were in schools over 100% of their capacity last year. Whereas the need to create additional classroom space in overcrowded districts is especially urgent since it can take up to 5 years or more to build and or expand schools. Whereas at City Council hearings on March 15th, Deputy Chancellor testified that will cost the DOE an estimated $30 billion to $35 billion to build enough additional school seats to comply with the class size law, an amount that would create 200,000 seats or more. Whereas despite this claim, the DOE and the School Construction Authority are currently planning to build only about 35,000 seats and are proposing to cut funding for new school construction by $2.3 billion and over 21,000 seats in the proposed February 2023 amendment to the 5-year capital plan, compared to the plan adopted in June 2021. Whereas, I just lost my spot here. Okay, whereas to this day, the School Construction Authority has not fully complied with 2 laws passed in 2018, meant to improve the transparency, accuracy, and efficiency of school planning and citing local laws 167 and 168, whereas DOE has only posted a brief 1-page summary of the fiscal year 2024 estimated budget in preparation for a vote by the Panel of Education Policy on March 22nd, 2023. And whereas State Law 2590A of the New York State Education Law requires that all estimates, all estimates submitted by the Chancellor shall be prepared in the manner prescribed by the New York City Charter for submission of departmental estimates. And the level of detail in this 1-page summary does not comply with this prescription. Therefore, be it resolved that the DOE inform the PEP, the City Council, and members of the public how much it intends to cut each school's fair student funding and Galaxy budget before any votes occur. Be it resolved that the DOE should clarify what other programs or staffing will be eliminated in the DOE budget to allow for the additional $90 million in fair student funding funds planned for the schools with high numbers of homeless and disadvantaged students. Be it resolved that from now on, the City Council should insist on 2 new units of appropriation U of A in the DOE budget that reflects on school level funding, subsets of the current U of A for general education and special education instruction. Be it resolved that instead of allowing any further cuts to school budgets, the Panel for Education Policy and the City Council should insist on an education budget for fiscal year 2024 that fully restores the cuts made to schools this year. Be it resolved that the council should reject any capital plan that does not expand the number of new seats rather than reduces them to ensure there is sufficient space to meet the law's class size benchmarks in the out years. And be it resolved that the council should insist that the SCA fully comply with 2 laws passed in 2018 designed to improve the transparency, accuracy, and efficiency of school planning and citing, Local Law 167 and Local Law 168.
I'll turn it now over to the parliamentarian to do public comments.
Thank you, Antonia. Thank you, Nakia. Public comments, please raise your hand and we will call one at a time. We'll do CEC members afterwards. Hi, Johanna, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'll even turn on my video for this one. Hello. I want to say thank you so much to our CEC members. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for this resolution. I cannot imagine how disheartening, and thank you also to our PEP member, Tazeen Azad. I can't imagine how disheartening it must be to see the PEP be rushed and forced into a budget vote again while public engagement is still ongoing. I mean, I think that for me is like, this is a very, very long resolution, and Lainey, amazing as always, but it comes down to one thing, which is that the period for public comment on the fair student funding weights is open until April 18th. It doesn't close. They are not done taking public comments from people like parents like me on the fair student funding weights until April 18th. How can you possibly vote and have it be any meaningful before April 18th? How is that possible? I know that the PEP has a hearing scheduled on the weights, and that is also after this period. We had a great meeting when they presented the FSF reform, and you had some great questions. And I thank you also for forwarding me the responses that we got so far, which are incomplete and didn't answer the big one on breakage. What are the thresholds for breakage? What is this ratio that they have between the citywide average and the base weight? And until there's transparency on that, how do you vote on a budget? So absolutely do whatever you can to prevent a vote going through tomorrow, because that is what you're there for. We have the PEP to be our school board. We have it to be the voice of parents. And right now you can't possibly vote to approve a budget tomorrow when this period is still open.
Thank you. As always, any other public comments this evening before we move to CEC? Comments and questions? Okay, I'll move it to CEC members. Please raise your hand. Or I think I'm going one by one. Isn't that the case now? Let me pull up the roll. Camille, we'll start.
I just want to say that I truly support this resolution, and thank you so much to everyone who worked so diligently on it. It doesn't, the way that the system is right now does not make any sense. We're doing things backwards in a vacuum. Consideration of what our asks
Yeah.
are, because they're all very legitimate and reasonable.
Thank you. Antonia?
Just thank you to Lainey for doing this great work as usual.
Okay. He is not here. Hold on, I have to find, there's the roll. Vincent.
I was reading the resolution, the third to the last. Can someone explain to me what does it do and what we're asking here?
You want me to explain?
No,
Yes.
that's fine. Oh, actually, the fourth to the last. Sorry, I missed the last one.
About the units of appropriation?
Yes, yes.
So if you look at the DOE budget, there are a lot of different budget lines, but it basically says general education, we're spending, I don't know what the amount is, but say $30 billion, special education, $20 billion, but it doesn't say how much of that is going to schools ever, anywhere in the budget. So I've been speaking to budget experts and asking, could we have another line in the budget to know exactly how much money is actually going to schools? And they said, yes, that you could have a subset of the overall general education instructional unit of appropriation and the overall special education unit of appropriation that reflects actual spending and funding at the school level rather than various other levels like district levels or central levels or contracts, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, contracts would be separate because that wouldn't be in that same budget line. But, there was a lot of confusion this year or last spring about the budget because DOE kept on saying, well, it's not going to affect schools. It's not going to cause, any teacher to lose their position at any school. And that turned out not to be true. And one of the problems is it's very easy to hide what happens at the school level, which is the most important level as far as our kids are concerned, in this huge, complicated, and very non-transparent agency budget.
I see.
So this would improve that.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, Nana?
Yeah, so thanks again for the resolution. It's well written and as always. But one of the few questions I had, just to piggyback on what the other parent, the question I had about it being premature, that taking that into consideration, what are we looking to achieve with the resolution, being the fact that it is we have the PEP thing on the 18th. What are we looking to achieve now if we do decide to move ahead with it? I guess that's a point I want to understand.
Does anyone have not to use their own time, but anyone can speak now, I think would be a good idea if they have something to contribute to Nana's question.
I think that question might be answered in the next resolution, actually. And Tazeen can speak to that when we get to the next resolution.
Well,
Yeah.
also this
Unless
resolution
Lainey
is
has-
also pointed to the city council, right? That has not even started budget negotiations. And so there is time yet to affect that ultimate outcome.
And speaking from my own thoughts on this, I think that last time, as a parent in the DOE and as a CEC member, I felt like the mayor steamrolled a budget. And to some extent, like bowed to court pressure, even because of its illegality, potentially. And that didn't happen until after the events occurred, until after those like really inappropriate things got passed through. And we need there to be a record that the population wasn't okay with this going into it. You know, and if this does pass through, even if it does go through the council, there needs to be a record of people saying, we weren't okay with that last year, we're not okay with it this year. That's my thought. Alfred?
I have no comment.
Yvonne?
I was just gonna give thanks to all the work that you guys put together to get together this resolution and the next one. And also, I think what I understand is that we're trying to make aware the PEP as well as the council of the things that are going to be decided very soon, and then in some way try to prevent what happened last year. And it's just upsetting that I mean, there is plenty of time, plenty of opportunities, plenty of situations where we can discuss this without making people rush to make a decision or vote. It is so upsetting. And it's like we're trying to prevent this every year, but it's just like, it's frustrating. That's all. But thank you for the work putting behind these two resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nancy?
I just want to say thank you so much, Lainey, for your work, for all of your work always. Thank you so much.
Vanessa?
I want to echo the thank yous to Lainey and to Antonia for putting work on this. I also want to acknowledge the fact that part of the resolution seeks to continue to work on regularly assessing the budget, because this is not a stagnant. School budgets change every year. We continue to develop different, needs and mechanisms to deal with those needs. So to Nana's and to Vincent's point and to Jaime's point, this is not a stagnant resolution. It really seeks to continue the work on a year-to-year basis.
Thank you. And then Nakia?
Yes, thank you, Lainey, for drafting this resolution, and Antonia for working on it. I wholly support it. And speaking to what Yvonne said, it is extremely frustrating to know that there are clear mandates and laws in place that explain the time that we have. It's published that April 18th is the last day for public comments, and yet this vote is happening before that time. And so I hope that this, works. I hope that it can do something, but it's just frustrating to know that the system in which we rely on is continuing to fail our schools. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And Councilmember Ressler?
I really appreciate the chance to jump in here too. And I want to thank the authors of the resolution. I just also want to provide some additional color and context. I think it's incredibly irresponsible for the mayor and the chancellor to try to push through a pet vote at this time, when not only are there complete unknowns around FSF funding and how that the additional FSF funding is going to work and be allocated, but after the chancellor made clear in our preliminary budget hearing last week that schools would not be held harmless next year if there are fluctuations or reductions in their enrollment. And furthermore, he said that he was totally unwilling to share any information around preliminary enrollment figures per school, so as to leave the council and the communities entirely in the dark until at best late May or early June. And to give us just a couple weeks or a few weeks to try and figure out how to solve for potentially significant cuts to our neighborhood schools is totally reckless. And the PEP does not have the information it needs to vote at this time. And the council and the chancellor and the mayor are doing everything they can to try to box in the council and limit our ability to mitigate further cuts from our schools. And I am going to do everything I possibly can to push the DOE to be more transparent, to share information so that we can plan accordingly together, CECs and council members and parent advocates, to get the information we need so that we can figure out how to fill these gaps and support our schools and fund them fully. And, you know, what happened in last year's budget was, you know, as somebody said a few moments ago, I do think it was kind of railroaded through and there was a lack of clarity around just how bad it was. But I certainly should have known better. And I think my colleagues and I have been clear, a number of my colleagues and I have been clear in saying that we didn't get it right. And we're not going to make that same mistake, or certainly I'm not going to make that same mistake again. And we are trying our best to be hawkishly on top of the chancellor and the OMB director and pushing them as hard as we can to provide the information that we need so that we can successfully advocate for properly and fully funding our schools. And I just really, as always, appreciate the CEC 15 team is as informed and thoughtful as any in the city. And your advocacy is really deeply appreciated.
All right, I will end comment period.
I'd like to make a motion to vote on this resolution.
Second.
All right, I will call the roll. Camille Cazzaretti, how do you vote on this resolution?
I approve.
Antonia Ferraro, yes, I approve this resolution. Vincent Liu?
I approve.
Nana Poku-Ajakun?
I approve.
Alfred DeAngelis?
Approved.
Joseph Alexander?
Approve.
Yvonne Bonda?
Approved.
Nancy Randall? Nancy Randall, able to
Approved.
speak? Okay, great. Vanessa Gonzalez Uoka?
I approve.
And Nakia Muhasa Brown?
Approve.
All right, the resolution passes. Thank you, Lainey, so much for this very thorough resolution. And now we will go immediately on to the resolution that we received from CCSE, the Special Education Council. And this resolution, I did a significant amount of edits to over the weekend. So it's quite different than when we read it last week. I will share my screen and I will ask Tazeen to come on and sort of give us some context, some more context about what the PEP is about to vote for.
Right, thank you so much, Antonia. My name is Tazeen Azad, and I am the Brooklyn Borough President appointee to the Panel for Education Policy. Please excuse me as I'm not on camera, doing double tasking with dinner making. But I guess this following resolution is going to speak to the fact that the PEP now needs to make sure that it is procedurally aligned and placed in a specific way so that the budget considerations are done most in a manner most informed. So as the resolution that you all voted on previously is directed towards the city council to make sure that they wait on the panel for education policy to receive full and complete and adequate information as to what the education budget will look like. As Lainey mentioned, the budget sheet explanation is just one sheet, and this is for the entirety of the city. And he also mentioned that we do not at any capacity receive more in-depth information regarding how this money will be expended. What we do as individual panel members, a few of us is do a lot of investigative works and listening to advocates around the city, including Class Size Matters and Advocates for Children and many other advocates that work to make sure that the students that need the most allocation or most support monetarily get it. So to instead and this sort of lawsuit that had or the requirement that the budget provides budgetary sort of consideration gives us enough information requires us to really do a deep dive into how and where the money is allocated. Now, included in the estimated budget, a portion of it, it should be informed by the FSF allocation. Now, I think this was also mentioned that the FSF has two new added weights to it that came out of the FSF working group recommendation and adopted by the chancellor. But at this point, we would be voting on the estimated budget before we technically even know whether or not those added weights are going to pass or not. So basically, we're voting for this estimated budget, and by default, is probably nodding whether or not we're going to be voting for FSF. Now, the reason it's important for me and a few other panel members to make sure that we know exactly what FSF allocation look like and also understand and really solidify that those weights are going to be part of that allocation and including where the budget line, where the funding source for those new weights are coming from. We also want to make sure that we are being careful with the enrollment projections that DOE is giving to your district and all the districts around the city. We remember the chaos that ensued after wildly inaccurate enrollment projections that informed the FSF vote, for which many of us did voted down. So to avoid all of these procedural technicalities, what we are hoping to hear from you, and I'm so glad that you guys are already ahead of that conversation today, in that we want to make sure that the FSF weight allocation vote happens first, so that not only we're understanding that those two new weights are absolutely included in the formula going forward, but then also understand which we will have to do through investigative work again, whether or not the enrollment projections are actually accurate. And that means that we want the feedback from the community. We want feedback from superintendents, from principals, give them adequate time to look at their numbers and projections and then give back the feedback so that we could fully be informed in what we're voting on. And then we're hoping that to vote for the estimated budget, as the FSF formula vote is sort of encapsulated within the estimated budget vote. And that is sort of the context behind why I think this resolution was drawn up, is basically to hold PEP accountable to the vote. And the previous one was to hold the city council accountable to their vote. Now, I would also just want to add one little bit that last year, the city council vote happened a little bit preemptively, and we want to make sure that the city council takes its time and does its due diligence and wait for the PEP to do their due diligence and take all of the community's input into consideration when they're making the decision, and to sort of maintain the procedural timeline and then the steps also to make sure that everybody gets to be included in this process, and then we make the best decision possible. I'll stop there. I'll take any questions if you have for me, and then I'll turn it back over to Antonia.
Why don't we read the resolution, and then will you stick around to answer questions, Tazeen?
Yep, I'm here.
Wonderful. Okay, I guess I'll read it. Resolution to have the PEP vote on the fair student funding formula prior to the school year 2023-2024 budget. Whereas in spring 2022, the Panel for Education Policy voted to reject the fair student funding allocations for the 2022-23 school year. PEP members cited decades of inadequate funding as a result of the fair student funding formula and the failure to publish and adopt the recommendations of the prior administration's fair student funding task force. Whereas the need to reevaluate the fair student funding formula might never have been revealed had the PEP not temporarily rejected the 2022-23 fair student funding allocation. Whereas in June of 2022, Mayor Adams and the City Council approved a fiscal year 2023 budget that severely cut school budgets. Schools were confronted with serious budget shortfalls due to the decision not to continue to hold schools harmless for enrollment loss by providing federal COVID funds. Some schools had budgets reduced as much as $5 million, leading to excising of teachers, guidance counselors, and paras. Whereas in June of 2022, 2 New York City parents and 2 teachers, the plaintiffs, filed a lawsuit seeking to overturn the City Council's approval of the city budget, which cut hundreds of millions of dollars from school budgets for this upcoming academic year. Whereas the lawsuit filed against New York City, the Department of Education, and New York City Schools Chancellor David Banks claimed that city officials failed to follow the proper protocols before elected officials voted on the final budget, which took effect July 1st. Whereas the plaintiffs also wanted a temporary restraining order on implementation of the budget cuts and for the city schools to be funded at the same levels as the last fiscal year. Whereas the lawsuit claimed the city skirted proper protocols by failing to allow the Panel for Education Policy, a largely mayoral appointed board that approves major contracts and policies, to approve the department's estimated budget before it went to the City Council for a final vote. Whereas Chancellor Banks created a new working group to continue the work done by the previous administration's Fair Student Funding Task Force, the working group was composed of representatives from the Council of School Supervisors and Administrators, the United Federation of Teachers, elected officials, PEP members, community and citywide education council members, education advocacy organizations, and students, which released recommendations on November 4th, 2022. Whereas the Chancellor accepted recommendations made by the working group to the existing formula in an effort to address inequities in the current funding formula. Whereas those recommendations include new weights to support students in temporary housing and schools with high concentrations of poverty. Whereas the Chancellor also accepted additional recommendations to the working group which do not directly impact fair student funding weights. Those recommendations include enhancing the budget appeals process to ensure it is responsive to the school's special education staffing needs, striving to improve budget transparency around both the Fair Student Funding Formula and the New York City Public Schools budget as a whole. Whereas the allocation of funds in the fiscal year 24 estimated budget hinges on Fair Student Funding weights, but the new Fair Student Funding weights cannot be implemented before a vote of the PEP. Whereas in spite of this, the PEP is scheduled to vote on the fiscal year 24 estimated budget Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023, that's tomorrow, prior to approval of these critical Fair Student Funding weights. Whereas in the absence of a vote of the PEP to approve the new Fair Student Funding weights, there is no transparency about how these weights will impact the estimated budget. Whereas there are concerns that new weights could be used to supplant other budgetary priorities, such as Project Open Arms, which serves students who are asylum seekers. And whereas if enacted, the Chancellor's new Fair Student Funding formula may improve outcomes for New York City students, but schools will continue to address emerging issues. Thus, the Fair Student Funding weights will require ongoing analysis. Some concerns are students continue to fall behind because of the school budget cuts in 2022, which did result in the accessing of teachers and the elimination of enrichment programs such as art and music, vacancies in related service providers and special education instructors were left unfilled, and the IEPs of students who need special education services were violated. And due to the influx of asylum seekers, our city requires additional funding to support special populations beyond the McKinney-Vento funding set aside that supports students in temporary housing. Therefore, be it resolved that in an effort to avoid any delay in planning for school year 2023-24 and provide transparency to the public about the impact of the new FSF weights on the budget, the Community Education Council of District 15 recommends that Chancellor Banks request a vote of the PEP on the Fair Student Funding formula prior to the vote on the school year 2023-24 estimated budget. Be it resolved that in a further effort to provide transparency, the New York City Council refrain from any vote on the FY24 budget until the new FSF formula is approved by a vote of the PEP. And be it further resolved that CEC 15 recommends the FSF working group continue to regularly assess FSF weights and develop related policy, including the implementation of guidelines and accountability measures, regardless of the outcome of the PEP vote. And I will turn it over to the parliamentarian.
All right, thank you for that. Let's start with public comments. Please raise your hand. Johanna, thank you.
Hi, it's me again. Again, it's not going to surprise you, but I'm really grateful for this proposal. And I wanted to highlight some of the reasons why it's so important to know more about the Fair Student Funding formula and how much transparency is still needed. I'm a math person, I'm mathy, I'm a budget person. I spend a lot of time with the Fair Student Funding formula, and I went back to the meeting notes from the working group to try to figure out how the concentration weights were going to be calculated, and I can't figure it out. There's nowhere in any of the materials that I've seen so far that provides any transparency on which schools are going to get the concentration weight of their Fair Student Funding. And that's really, I think, an important part of transparency around this formula is knowing that we can check the DOE's math when they give a certain subset of schools a whole bunch of extra money. Another question that why we need more transparency is that it's unclear to me whether or not the new weights are going to be subject to the mid-year adjustment. The mid-year adjustment means that, in October, the budget is based on estimates. In October, they count the actual number of students, and then the budget is adjusted in the middle of the year in November or in February. That creates a lot of budget volatility for schools, and that budget volatility is really hard to handle when a lot of your budget is not volatile, when more than 90% of your budget is in staff and more than 90% of fair student funding is in staff. Having big swings in the middle of the year is hard. So knowing exactly how the mid-year adjustment how these weights are going to relate to the mid-year adjustment is really important. And then lastly, again, and this was something that, I'm so grateful that the CEC asked for this, and to my knowledge, nobody has answered it. What are the things the weights are supposed to address, and the weight adjustment is supposed to address is breakage, meaning what happens when you don't have enough students to pay for the service that the weight is meant to address. And this is particularly true for special ed, where the weights are supposed to cover the cost of a second teacher for an ICT teacher, or the lower class size in a 12-to-1 class. And and then of course in a general education class setting, the number of students that you need in the class in order to pay for that teacher. And we asked when they did the presentation on the last month, and they said they'd get back to us, and they haven't. And I don't know if the PEP knows that, but it's, I think, a really important criteria to understand whether or not these reforms are actually going to be doing what they mean to do. If you know that, oh, we're giving this much money, and that means that now this is going to change the breakage rate for these smaller schools or these concentrated schools to a different criteria. And you know that we're not going to get answers to these questions without them having to have a reason to give it to us. And I really hope that the PEP will be able to get answers to this, that the city council will have some transparency, and most of all, that the public will be able to weigh in on this process the way that we are meant to be able to weigh in. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's move to CEC comments and questions. Antonia?
I don't have any comments.
Thank you. Camille, I think you're next.
I don't have any comments. I just want to say thank you to Johanna because we don't often get this insight into how the money is impacting the school budgets in that deep way. And so thank you for sharing all of that information.
Yeah, absolutely. Vincent?
Hey. No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Nana?
No comment. Once again, this gives me a whole lot more clarity, and I appreciate, putting this together. So thanks.
Thank you. Alfred?
I have no comment. Thank you.
Okay. Yvonne?
No comments, but thank you for all the work behind this document. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Nancy?
Sorry. I want to say thank you to Zine for being here and for highlighting the importance of this resolution. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Same, no comments or questions, just Joanna and Zine, thank you for your work. I really appreciate it.
And Nakia?
Thank you, Johanna and Tazine. Yeah, no comments.
Thank you. And I have no comments other than thanks very much again for looking out for your district and school system. So Camille, back to you, or Antonia, whoever's running it.
Okay, hold on a second, let me stop sharing this. All right, I'd like to make a motion to vote.
Second.
Okay, Camille, how do you vote?
I approve.
Antonia Ferraro, yes, I approve the resolution. Vincent Liu?
I vote yes.
Nana Poku Ajikum?
I approve the resolution.
Alfred DeAngelis?
Approved.
Joseph Alexander?
I approve.
Yvonne Bonda?
Approved.
Nancy Randall?
Approve.
Vanessa Gonzalez Uoka?
I approve.
Nakia Muhasa Brown?
Approve.
All right, this resolution passes unanimously. Thank you, guys. Camille, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, sorry, just having trouble with my mute here. Okay, great. So hugely successful meeting. Thank you so much, everyone. We will share these resolutions with the DOE tonight. I will work on that. And see you on Tuesday next week for our in-person CEC meeting at 676. I had dropped the link in the chat earlier today, but we are going to be meeting in person for that meeting. And then if you all would like to have our April business meeting on Zoom, we can do that. So just let me know what you'd like to do. And see you all next week then. So I'm motioning to adjourn at 8:13.
Second.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Have a nice night.
Bye, good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you so much, Tazeen and Lainey.